On the 23rd of October 1942, the most important battle of the Second World War was taking place. Roughly 80 miles from the second largest Egyptian city of Alexandria, German troops were in a crucial fight with the British over control of the Nile. On the deserts of Egypt, the future of the world was at stake, and whether that world would end up being dominated by fascists was to be decided in this old country. If the Germans were successful and gained control of the Nile River Delta, then a few things would happen. Firstly, the British colonies of Palestine and Sudan would be isolated from one another, and so would the British troops stationed there, who would be cut off and split from each other and from their supplies, and would have to fight against an invading German force on their own. With the enemy divided, the Germans could launch a new offensive into the Levant and Iraq to gain control of the oil fields in the Persian Gulf and Iran, who was also occupied by the British for this very reason of oil. Having control of the Middle East, the Germans would have a continuous supply of oil to send to their military fighting in the Soviet Union. Not only would the Germans be gaining much needed energy resources, but the British would at the same time be losing those supplies of energy. With the British having lost a good portion of their oil, the Axis would have an advantage in fighting the British Empire throughout the globe, even though the United Kingdom received a lot of oil from Venezuela and the United States. Oil wasn't the extent of the German advantage either, however. The British war effort was reliant on supplies and soldiers from the British colonies, especially from areas like India, Australia, and Africa. These supplies and men usually crossed the Suez Canal, which in this scenario would be blocked off and under German control. If the British lost their oil supplies and their troop resources, while their colonies were isolated, and at the same time the Germans gained a stable supply of oil and more resources from said colonies, who would also be put at a vulnerable position, then the British war effort would have been in serious jeopardy and at a serious disadvantage. But that's not what happened. The leaders of the Third Reich believed in something called Lebensraum, which means living space, as in a living space for the German people to live and grow their population. The territories that the Germans occupied already had much of it, but Russia had the most of it. When the battle for Egypt was taking place, the German High Command focused more of their troops on the Eastern Front, which they viewed as more important than Egypt, due to the oil in the Caucasus and the Lebensraum that the Germans wanted in Russia. The German leader also had a special hatred for Slavic people in general, which may or may not have influenced his valuing of the Eastern Front over the Egyptian one. Nonetheless, because of fascist Germany's desire for Lebensraum, oil, and simple racism, the German war effort in Egypt floundered as troops and supplies that could have been sent to take over the country instead went to Russia, where they mostly died or got destroyed. The British troops soon pushed the fascists out of Egypt and into Italian-occupied Libya. At the same time, however, American troops alongside the British landed in northwest Africa and liberated French-occupied Morocco and Algeria from Axis control. At this point, Italian-occupied Libya was surrounded on both sides and subsequently taken over by the Allies, who then chased the Axis forces to defeat in Tunisia. Strategically speaking, this defeat was disastrous for the Axis. By having taken over Tunisia, the Americans and the British were less than 100 miles from Sicily, and from that island, an invasion of Italy commenced. The Italians soon signed a treaty with the Allies and Mussolini was arrested. This was not acceptable though, since it would put the Americans and the British right on Germany's southern border, and the German High Command soon spent more money and supplies, keeping at least half of Italy a fascist state, which did not help their losing situation in Russia. Moreover, the free movement of British oil and war supplies through the Suez Canal towards the British and American soldiers in Italy and elsewhere helped greatly with supplying the Italian campaign, whereas the German energy and supplies remained the same, if not were less, and were divided between fighting two serious fronts in Russia and Italy. Much of this was due to the fact that the German High Command missed the value of the Middle East in winning the war. Egypt was strategic specifically because of its central location between Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean, and whoever had control of its geography had the higher advantage.